Welcome back to the 262nd episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including Trump's proposal to really roll back some of Biden's big EV plans and him courting oil executives, the immigration crisis that's going on in Ireland, and how some of the parallels actually provide an insight into the populist movements, but also the right here in America, and then talking about the VP candidates for Donald Trump. We're going to do this one again. Absolutely love it. It's just fun to speculate. And of course, we'll end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive. I'm ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump in to our daily debate. So we know that underneath the Biden administration and the Trump administration, they've had very different policy approaches. Very seldom is a policy held over, let's put it that way, from the Trump administration. I think the only one was probably the tariffs towards China, at least any of the major ones that I can think of off of the top of my head. Besides that, maybe a little bit of monetary policy, but even then had to change because of COVID-19. But I'm pretty sure that Trump and Biden would have gone on similar paths if COVID-19 wasn't in the way, because Trump wasn't necessarily the most restrictive person when it came to the Fed interest rate and things like that, and Biden probably would have kept that going. But besides all of that, what do you think the largest gap is? Because, you see the EV story come up a lot. We see the infrastructure story, focusing on domestic manufacturing, and both people talk about it, but one actually is doing it versus the other, or at least that's the argument that you would hear nowadays that Biden is in the presidency. So what issue do they have the largest gap on? Maybe it's immigration, and we'll be talking about that in our second article. But before we get to that one, we're going to jump to one that I think is a little bit more interesting, and it comes from Quartz. The headline reads, Trump offers to gut Biden's EV and environmental rules for oil execs' support. So we know that Trump has never really liked EVs anyway. I mean, he has gone to unions, or at least tried to reach out to the American auto workers and say, hey, I got you. We're going to stop this EV transition, which are going to have to be made at new plants, or at least in new processes. And when they're developing these manufacturing lines from the very beginning, they're probably going to have more robots in there. It's actually going to end up displacing some of your jobs, because instead of making engines here in the United States, they're going to make the batteries over in China and send them over. So that's jobs lost for the auto unions. And he's tried to really position himself in a way where, hey, I am pro-America, and I want to make sure that we're not forcing anybody to do anything they don't want to, whether that be the unions, whether that be consumers. We're not just going to heave this environmental policy onto people and expect them to absolutely love it. I don't know if the messaging has necessarily been effective. And what I mean by that is not that, it resonates, because it resonates with Trump's base and probably a few people in the middle ground. But also the middle ground that he would have to court is the suburban moms. And I'll be honest, if you're a suburban mom, it's not like you're the richest person in the world. It's not like you can afford the best EVs, but you are at least a person who is well off enough that you can probably think about some of these larger issues. The reason that something about arguing for a gas-powered car or arguing to protect these jobs, the reason that these would resonate is these are things that affect people on a daily basis who aren't necessarily as well off as somebody who is in the EV market. And you may be saying, Alex, wait, hold on, what do you mean? Why does that matter? Worrying about the future and the environmental movement, that is I don't want to say a privilege of people who have the time and resources to look towards the future and aren't trying to survive every single day. Because I don't want to make it like a class structure kind of baloney. I feel like that actually gets lost, because there are people in any class. There are people in the upper echelons that don't care about environmentalism. There are people in the lower echelons who do care about environmentalism. But we know, as of right now, that EV cars are more expensive, and a lot of them are being purchased by people who are eco-sensitive. They're at least aware of the issues. They want to think about the future. Maybe it's also a little bit trendy, but guess what? If it's trendy, if we're going to go through all those, if it's trendy, then if you don't have the money, if you're a working class person, you can't just spend an extra $10,000 on a car, then you're not going to follow that trend. if it's something where you're eco-conscious, a lot more people who can worry about their future, their kids' future, things like that, are going to be eco-conscious compared to the people that are just trying to make it through the day. And the first point, which is EV cars are just more expensive in general, it's going to be hard to convince somebody to put out that extra little bit of money. Maybe a hybrid's on the table, sure, but a full EV car, you're going to have a hard time getting them to commit that extra money when they just need something that will get them from point A to point B, especially when we're talking about rural voters who are probably in locations that don't have too many superchargers. The charging network's not that great. I'll be honest, in Kentucky, when I was living there, you see a little bit of it here and there. I would look up some of the locations just because I was interested. And then when you're in this part of Virginia where I am recording right now, you don't see much infrastructure. You go to where I lived for most of my life, and there are plenty of charging stations everywhere. I mean, you see them left, right, and center, and that's because the market's already developed there. The infrastructure needed to not only catch up to the people that were buying the cars, but also there was a little bit of an inverse because now that they saw the network, it actually encouraged people to say, oh, it's a feasible thing. Now we can buy some of these cars. Population is also a lot more well off. It's a lot of suburbs, and they're not necessarily all, let's be clear, plenty of people up there are not making it through on the absolute maximum lifestyle. They're going through the life minimum, and they're having a hard time just like any other people. But the population up there is more able to buy the electric cars, and the network was expanding because there was a little bit of interest there. Then more people bought EVs, and then that tells the companies, okay, hey, we expanded our network here. More people are willing to buy now that they see it's possible, that it's actually something that's viable for them in their community. So we're going to start putting out some more EVs in those locations. And when Biden is talking about all of this, he's talking to those people, and he's talking to some of those middle of the road people too, who are, they're like, okay, can we afford it? Is it worth it? Maybe we care about the environmentalism a little bit. And I feel like Trump doesn't necessarily he doesn't have a good track record with those types of voters, the middle of the road voters. Like I said earlier, the suburban moms, that is the trope. That is the group that has defined whether or not Donald Trump will win the presidency in a lot of people's minds. And you hear it over and over and over again. One, because Democrats believe that he is actually very weak among that group, but also because that's the previous trend that we've seen. Now, things have changed. We've seen a lot of shift from the more suburban voters to some different coalitions that Trump could bring in order to actually win. And I think that part of these groups that he's trying to court, the people that are maybe a little bit closer to the blue collar, like the union workers, who he already kind of has in the bag, but he's trying to strip off a few more of them. The people who are just out of college, and I know that you're probably thinking, Alex, what do you mean? But he has made an appeal, whether it is informed or not, to the men of Generation Z who are just coming out of college, feel as though for some reason they're disenfranchised. They have worked their butts off, and they went through school, and they were treated like crud. I'm not saying that's all guys. I know plenty of guys who went to my college, including myself, who absolutely loved it, who felt there was no problem whatsoever. I have also met plenty of other gentlemen over the course of the last year who don't believe that. They see how the school treats men versus women, and they feel like they're kind of forced into a situation where they're saying, hey, okay, I don't want to perpetuate this. I don't want to give the people who are in controls at some of these universities, I don't want to vote for somebody that they would vote for because obviously he must believe what they believe. And I know that's really tenuous logic, and that doesn't mean that it's going to work out. But this goes for all men across the entire board. And guess what? Men may be a little bit less than half. I believe we have about 53% women in the United States. Last time I checked, it could have shifted since then. I know most colleges are somewhere around like 55 to 57%. Some are even higher than that. But my point being, it's not going to win you just having all the men on your side, but it's still a giant block. Just like Youngkin really tapped into the suburban moms and dads in Virginia, and how you saw Bashir trying to really tap into the pro-choice, the for abortion argument in Kentucky. Let's be clear. These are two different cases. There's a Republican governor and a Democratic governor, but they both found those through line things that they could build a larger coalition around, and they could say, hey, this is going to be the big changer. Because I'll be honest, a lot of people in Kentucky probably didn't care at all, but it came down to pro-choice, and it brought some of those moderate women in. A lot of people probably didn't care about what was going on in Virginia, but then there was a school narrative that was saying parents are not going to be as involved in the lives of their children. They shouldn't be, and guess what? He ran with it. Now, if Trump can do the same thing with young men, one, it could be a catalyst to keep this trend going for a little bit among young men, because as I've pointed out before, I used to have conversations with some of my friends' parents, and they would say, oh yeah, well, this generation, they're just so one single-minded. They only have one way of looking at it. I was like, actually, if you break it down, Gen Z is more conservative than any of the previous generations except the boomers. I'm not saying they're actually, if the millennials have 40% the conservatives, then this generation is completely outpacing them, and it's like 50%. No, but if the trend for like Gen X to millennial has been like, Gen X has about 45 conservatives, 45% of that population is conservative, and millennials about 40%, then Gen Z is probably somewhere around like 47. You kind of have a reverse bell curve, and there's more conservative sentiment. And whether that's because the culture war has stoked these issues that really court people and bring them into the conservative ecosystem, even though they wouldn't have been conservative in the past, and the Overton window has just shifted, or maybe that's because the generation that I'm in grew up on the internet, and this whole censor, like, oh, you can't tell me what to say. The FCC that would used to monitor the radio shows and give out huge penalties if they would curse or anything like that. Yeah, no. So that we grew up in a time before everything was fully regulated and moderated on the internet. So when someone comes in and now says, okay, hey, we're going to start restricting speech, people get really angry. And that, in general is not a conservative issue, but normally the side that is more willing to restrict speech in order to preserve people's feelings to create a more safe environment has been liberal during our lifetime, even though in the past it would have been conservatives who were Christians saying, oh, hey, this is vulgar, this is obscene, we can't have this on our networks. So it's actually very interesting how these dynamics play out. I'm sorry, I went on a really, really long rant here about the nature of shifting demographics and these groups that Trump could really tap into. But the whole point of the article is he's trying to tap into the oil executives. He's saying, hey, during my time as president, we were energy independent. I was not restricting you guys, or at least not as much as possible. I was opening up federal land so you guys could drill. I was allowing lots of different speculation. The oil market was looking good for you guys. I wasn't talking about shifting our economy to more renewable resources. Hey, I was still developing them. And I know your businesses have huge departments now that focus on renewable energy sources, just like BP, and you see all those commercials. Oh, it's not either or, it's both. And he could probably use that, say, hey, yeah, well, of course we're going to develop any way that we can get energy, but I'm not going to restrict oil. That is the group he is courting here. So I'm going to read one longer quote from the article because I've been ranting for quite some time, and then we'll probably move on from this one because I feel as though we fleshed out the underlying thing that we're actually discussing here rather than just what the article is getting at on the superficial level. Quote, the Washington Post reports that the Republican candidate for U.S. president met with some of the nation's top oil executives at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach. Quote, one such rule mentioned at the meeting was the Department of Energy, so they're talking about rules that Trump would try to get rid of. This rule, quote, the Department of Energy's freeze on permits for liquefied natural gas, LNG, which has been criticized by fossil fuel groups and celebrated by environmentalists. The pause, which applies to exports to any country the U.S. does not have a free trade agreement with, is a big deal for oil executives. The U.S. was the largest exporter of LNG during the first half of 2023, averaging 11.6 billion cubic feet per day. Per day! That is absolutely insane. And the reason that we were actually positioned to do this is because we had expanded our LNG production And this was even during the beginning of Biden's administration. Even though there was some things about, cracking down here and there was still a little bit of at least not rolling back. They weren't closing these LNG plants. They were keeping them operating. And a lot of them opened during the latter year of Obama's time, as well as during the Trump presidency. And we were very well positioned for when the war in Ukraine started and the other European nations were saying, shoot, well, we can't actually support Russia on this one. Can we keep buying gas from them? And they did to some degree, but the U.S. could step up and say, hey, well, we're doing this thing called LNG. I mean, I know you guys know all about it. And it's a really efficient fuel. It is a little bit of a pain to store and ship, but hey, we'll handle all that on our side because we're doing all the refining, and we will ship it out to you guys. You can make so much beautiful, cleaner energy than burning coal in France. We know you're shutting down your nuclear plant. Oh, it's okay, buddy. Mon ami, we will supply you with your LNG. Oh, I could have made that rhyme. But the point being, we were very well positioned for this. And this rule, if the war keeps going on in Ukraine, you could even make an argument that we should up our production even more so that we show them, one, we can supply your energy needs now, but also we can do it going into the future. That would be an actually really interesting foreign policy discussion that I would love to see I know there's behind-the-scene discussion about it. I would like for the people behind the scenes to come out and actually talk about it because it would be fascinating. It would be absolutely fascinating to hear this conversation because it is a chess match that we would be playing and trying to not necessarily project what the future would be, but take a serious look at the position that the U.S. needs to have on the world stage when it comes to energy production and if we could be a big player. I think that it needs to be under consideration. So if you're looking at Biden's policy, the argument is it's actually more productive for us to cut some of the production of these different gas or fossil fuel-based energy sources because we need to not be raising the temperature of the earth, which could put us at a strategic disadvantage. It could cause famine. It could cause the American heartland to go under. There are lots of different extrapolations from there, which would be a good argument for national security that, hey, we need to focus on this for our future. And then you could also have a completely similar national security argument going on, but financial security, domination of, or at least a large participation in the marketplace of energy and energy production, because we could expand some of our LNG and other types of mining and other types of fossil fuel refining here in the United States in order to ship it over into nations that are needing it. I mean, we could supply it to countries that are coming up on the world stage. We could be an actual competitor to Russia in that way. We could try to work with OPEC, and I'm not saying, let's be clear, we already work with OPEC, or at least lots of OPEC nations, but maybe there could be I don't like international bodies, but I'm saying if you were to be completely strategical about it and you were to disregard whether or not you like international bodies and you were to think, okay, hey, we're going to set up a body in order to instill an American-centric or at least a worldview, a position, a standard that benefits the American LNG market, fossil fuel market, whatever it may be, you could get together with some of these larger nations and say, hey, let's put into the World Fuel Fund, and then the IFF, and then you start giving out money or subsidies, and whether it be fuel or you give out loans to these countries so they can buy fuel from the different countries that are a part of it, and then they can use it to actually make their economies go a little bit faster, maybe raise them up a little bit, so then we can actually, and the reason you can make an argument for this national, at least overall, you can make an argument for it, is it's going to provide more, because if you look at the rapid improvement of human existence and the improvement in technology, it comes with the amount of energy that we can produce and therefore use, because, you start with like steam engine and we can move faster across different large areas. We can produce things more quickly. Then you have something that's even cheaper to produce and then move around even easier and is actually more efficient. You're talking about some of your gases, your diesel, things like that. And then you have nuclear. So as we have more access to more electricity, we're actually able to do more with it and therefore able to improve our lives more quickly and also innovate more. So you could argue, hey, for the sake of innovation, we need to send it to some of these countries that are developing right now, get them on the fast track, get them up to speed with us, and then we can shift them over to renewables. And if the U.S. is a part of that, if they're a part of that international agency that structures things that way, they can actually set these rules in place and say, hey, this is one of our governing orders, just like how the UN has a Security Council with 5 not basically pure power votes, where they say, hey, no, in the Security Council, boom, no, we're not doing this. We say no. And all it takes is that one of the 5 permanent seats to say no. And that was set up in a world where Britain, France, America, China, and then the USSR, all the allies, had power. And guess what? It still has all of those members on the Security Council in their permanent seats, and they still use that to influence some things. So maybe we could do the same thing on the international stage. And the only reason I go there, like I said, don't like international bodies. I don't like how the international system is meant to breach people's sovereignty, but maybe if it's a international nonprofit, you could get around that. But my point being that if you're being strategical about it and you're trying to make a national security argument, you could very well do it in that way. So you see Biden's point of view with the environmentalism, trying to protect the future of our nation, trying to not raise the temperature so there are migrants coming from other nations who are being displaced because of the rising seas or the rising temperatures, the loss of soil, the fertility in the middle of the U.S., which provides a lot of our food and gives us leverage on the world stage in order to trade. Both of these arguments can be very well made from a national security standpoint, and we'll see how it all plays out. But it's always interesting when you start dissecting which rules specifically the president who's running is saying, hey, no, we're going to get rid of that, and why he's doing it. Because the fact that he's meeting with oil executives, and let's be clear, there could be a chicken and egg problem here. Maybe he really does want to repeal some of these things because he thinks America needs to be energy independent, and that's bringing in the oil executives. Or it could be vice versa. And also, let's be clear, with that first situation, bringing in the oil executives and giving money cements the fact that he'll definitely try to do it. Or it could be vice versa, and the oil executives are saying, hey, it was good underneath Trump, let's give him some money, and then they propose different rules that they want stripped away. But either one is money in politics, and I have called this out many a times. It is going to keep on happening the way that our system is structured unless we actively try to change it. And it's always hilarious because each side calls it out. I get so frustrated. How dare these big corporations, these nonprofits throw so much money into it? And then when they have groups that do it on their side, they're like, oh, they are a good patron and supporter of the democracy and the American system. But we all acknowledge, if you want to get money out on all sides, if you genuinely believe that there is no place for money on all sides, get it out. I think that the power that lobbyists have is extremely, extremely strong. There is no doubt about that. But that also doesn't mean I don't think there is a place. There is some way to go about it that we could make work. And I've been thinking about it, and I'll expand on it a little bit later, and maybe in a later episode when we do one more exclusively about lobbying. But we spent a lot of time on this article, so let's jump into the next one. This is a Fox News article, and the headline reads, "Here's why Ireland is at a boiling point over mass immigration." So I read that this is for Fox News, this is honestly a pretty long article. And I read this morning while I was walking. And I was saying to myself, I want to quote some of the numbers here. Quote, "Immigration into Ireland has more than doubled over the last 20 years, with 22% of the population now made up of non-citizens, meaning Ireland has the 4th largest non-national population of all 27 EU states." So that is absolutely insane. Also, in local elections, they mentioned later on here, and it's very close to the bottom, so I may not get the exact quote that I want, but the fact that these immigrants in local elections can actually vote, I mean, come on. That is absolutely insane. You cannot have a system that's sustainably run that way. And you say, okay, hold on. You maybe have multiple objections. One, Alex, it's just local elections. That's not national. Local politics affects national politics. Things can boil up from the local level. Parties can gain steam on the local level, and they can use the support that they have in certain communities in order to leverage it to get concessions from their higher-ups, to get into political office, to afford different change. So, no, I think that argument falls flat on its face. But secondly, well, hey, Alex, this is one of the objections here. Well, Alex, I mean, they're basically residents of that country now. They've decided to come there, contribute to the economy. Why can't they vote? And, they're going through the process of possibly becoming legal, or at least they've gone through the proper process of being called a refugee. Why shouldn't they be allowed to vote? And my argument would be, what buy-in have they made? Have they become an official citizen of the country? And the reason that's important is no matter if you're living there, it only matters if you have actually bought into the system. And what I mean by that is that maybe you're having kids there, and that's why I think some naturalization rules have a place. Even though I think some of them can be used, like anchor baby policies, they can be used to a certain political end. I think at least there's something there that is actually important, because they're buying into the system. The parents are buying into the system. The child's going to stay here in this country. They are now a citizen of this country. They're buying into the system. They're contributing to the system, but also they want to be invested politically. They're willing to sacrifice certain things, like their, how should I say it? Their status as a citizen in other countries sometimes, because sometimes you have to give that up in order to be a citizen in a different country. So if you haven't given that up, if you haven't bought into the Irish way of life, if you haven't bought into being a part of that culture rather than importing your own culture, then should you really be a part of that nation? And don't get me wrong, you can bring aspects of your culture to that nation, but let me do a 10,000 feet hypothetical, okay? You have a nation that is 85% Zinta, okay? It's a new religion that I just made up off the top of my head. It is 85% Zinta, and people want to come to this nation that has an 85% population, Zinta religious affiliation, and they want to take advantage of some of the economic opportunities, and say they're of another religion, Luta, and Luta and Zita have very different values. One of them is a matriarchal religion, and one is a patriarchal religion. And obviously, those different worldviews are going to come into conflict at some point, especially if they're trying to install people into government in order to put laws on the books. If the Zinta have I forgot the name of the other religion, but the other religion, if they get somebody in and they say, hey, we want a law that designates the mother as the head of the household, that's obviously going to come in conflict with the value of the other religion that's 85%. And is that something that you should accommodate, or no, should you actually assimilate into their culture? Because one, it's going to cause strife if you don't, but two, in order to be a part of a successful culture, if there's a successful culture, what has made them that way? Maybe there are aspects to it that have actually made them successful, and maybe you should buy into that rather than bringing your own views from a place that obviously isn't successful or less successful and trying to change the place you're going to. I don't know. I feel like that's a pretty well fleshed out and trodden on argument. But this is a really interesting battle that's going on politically within Ireland, and we'll see how it plays out. I may come back to it if there's any major developments, but right now it is not looking good for people who do not want to see immigrants in Ireland, or at least the large number of immigrants that they're getting right now. So we're going to go to our last one. I think everybody's calling it the Veep Stakes. I don't necessarily like that. We're going to look at the VP candidates for Donald Trump, and by that, we're going to go over a few of them over the course of the next few days. Whenever I see articles about them, I'm going to pluck them. The one I always found interesting is talking about Doug Burgum, the governor of North Carolina. Wow. Did I say North Carolina? Wow, I am an absolute idiot. No, of North Dakota. And he was obviously on that presidential stage. He was trying to compete. He was trying to put his mission out there, talk about deregulation. And a lot of people liked him. They thought he was a cool guy. He hurt his ACL. playing basketball before the debate, and he was up there. Some people suspected that he was on painkillers because of the surgery, and he says no, he was not, but maybe he was a little bit out of it because he didn't really get engaged in that first debate, but he came to play the second time, and some people really like him, and now the idea is, hey, well, maybe he's a good VP candidate. I'm gonna put it out there. I don't think he has enough panache. And also, I have my own personal thing. If there's going to be anybody, if there is going to be anybody that is going to be Donald Trump's VP, I think he should go with Tulsi Gabbard. One, because she is a actual symbol of the craziness of the left from people on the right's point of view, because she said that the left has gone way beyond where she was, and she left the Democratic Party. She's also still a little bit more independent, still has some of those Democratic bona fides. Democrats have seen her in the primary election, so anyone who's like a casual viewer, when they were looking at the primary election in 2020, they have a passing knowledge of her, especially with her roasting of Kamala Harris. Also, they can leverage the roasting of Kamala Harris in the VP battles that would go back and forth. And she's a woman. Not that that really matters. I think the whole intersexual argument is stupid, but at the end of the day, it's something that some people care about. And also, if you really do believe that people from certain states bring those states, maybe you have a higher turnout in Hawaii. I don't really think that matters that much. The electoral votes aren't that high, and also Hawaii's historically pretty darn blue. Things aren't going to change too much there. But maybe it's something to bring in. So I think that's who we should go with. That's why I don't think Burgum's going to actually be the guy. But he's recently put some stuff out there. He was talking about, hey, we don't negotiate with Harris, and Liz Cheney, the disaffected Republican that she is, came in, RKO from out of nowhere, came out on Twitter and said, actually, Mr. Burgum, we did negotiate with X, Y, and Z. And I was just like, whether or not I like the slamming, and I understand what Doug Burgum is actually trying to get at, which is if they have hostages, we're going to not negotiate with them, at least directly with them, maybe through another party, or we're going to talk with another party about mediation, but we're not going to endorse them stealing and holding our people hostage. I get what he's getting at, but the fact that she's coming in on a technicality and she is just trying to dunk on anybody associated with Donald Trump is like, yeah, the Cheney vibe, the Halliburton vibe. Come on in and try to keep out the populace. It's just kind of hilarious to me. I found it amusing, and also, it was a pretty good dunk. It was a pretty good Twitter dunk. So, but then you see the kind of center left, center right, mainstream, the trash monster. The swamp monster. The goop monster. I don't know what you want to call it, but the establishment kind of come in and be like, oh, ooh, burn. Ooh, Cheney got him. I did kind of find it hilarious. But if you want to go read that article yourself, there'll be a link in the description below, like and subscribe button. But we do have one more, and it's going to be our Daily Delight. And this one was very, very interesting. Also passing, there was the passing of Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the Pentagon Papers, crucial moment in exposing the government corruption / narrative manipulation during his time. So yeah, that's also something I was going to do a whole article on, but it honestly felt like it was a little bit too late. It felt like it happened, and I didn't necessarily want to go out there and just kind of farm that. I'm reading about him currently, so I also don't necessarily know enough to be like, oh, his career was so influential, and really do a deep dive on it. So with that out of the way, let's jump into our Daily Delight. Beagle and family cat hold pause in car rides, and it's everything. And I've talked about this before. I'm definitely a dog guy. I'm not really a cat guy. Let's be clear, cats can be cute. I have friends who have cats. I'm slightly allergic. They can be kind of annoying. They can also be kind of nice to hang around for a little bit. But if I'm choosing an animal, I'm not choosing a cat. But then you see moments like this where cats and dogs get along, and you see that they can coexist, and then you think to yourself, well, it's probably not going to happen, but you don't want to totally discount it. And this is one of those cute moments that even made me reconsider, like, okay, I don't have to hate on the cats all the time, basically is what I'm coming to. So if you want to see this cute video, read this article, read any of today's articles, like I mentioned earlier, there's the link in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Google Podcasts, as well as Podvine, and the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.